Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon. Together, we break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's July 21st, 2025. Let's get into it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Hey, Eric. As always, living the dream.
Well, happy birthday.
Yep, 67. Funny thing about that is my anniversary was 2 days ago, and I used to always ameliorate the horror of my advancing years by saying, well, if I've been married for 45 years, then I guess I'd better be 67 years old. But today, Eric, I just got off a Zoom call with 15-ish of my former Duke basketball teammates. We haven't talked, and I haven't bored you with my love of Duke and Duke women's basketball, but this was just great. Anyone who knows and has played a sport, you go through a lot with your teammates, and to still have these women, more than 40 years later is pretty funny. So that was a surprise, and it was special. But interestingly, on that Zoom call, we talked about this, and all of them are now avid listeners to what we're doing here. So I guess we're doing something of value, huh?
Well, that's awesome that they put that together for you. I've been really impressed and grateful for the support for this podcast, and on our launch, a number of people reaching out and the number of downloads and listeners that we've had. It's been really incredible. So kind of humbling, and adding a little bit of pressure here that we've got something to live up to, but super cool that people were interested and that they've given us so much support.
But I got to tell you, people are really super willing to say, why didn't you mention this when you talked about cyber? Are you not aware of all the work that's going on for citizens to help them with scam stopping? And so just keep it coming. Eric and I are coaches' dreams. You tell us there's something we can do better, we're going to want to do it better. So thanks for the support, and don't be shy.
Sure. Well, you don't look a day over 67. Congratulations.
Awesome. Thanks. Hence why we're on a podcast.
Happy birthday.
Thanks.
Let's get to some headlines. The ODNI released a report Friday alleging a treasonous conspiracy to take Trump down in 2016 with Russia hoax. CIA's push for AI augmented analysis, America's drone stockpile shortage, rare earths, and the Chinese chokehold. Finally, state cyber grants at risk of going dark. So, Sue, we'll start with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Friday afternoon declassified evidence of Obama administration conspiracy to subvert President Trump's 2016 victory and presidency. So as you look through it, there's a lot of redacted segments and lines blacked out and things. Plenty of language of Russian preference for Trump in the 2016 election, but the overall assessment was less likely to manipulate computer-enabled election infrastructure, so less likely to hack, more likely to be an influence type operation. I guess my question for you is, why are we still talking about this? And I didn't see anything in there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple just disclaimers. One is I really try hard not to ascribe intent to people's actions. If I'm not sitting in the room with them, if I don't know them personally, I try and stay away from it. The second thing is, while I am really on the record, I think what's going on to denigrate government in general, our national security and intelligence apparatuses are just so fundamentally misguided, but not for the reason that I'm not super judgy and think that any wrongdoing shouldn't be pursued. It's just wrongdoing generally is pursued, and some of the things that are coming out now are just wrong and are undermining both the community and the American people's trust. So here's what I think. Much like when John Ratcliffe released the intelligence analysis note he had prepared by the CIA, going through the intelligence community assessment on assessing Russian activities and intention in recent U.S. elections. The disconnect between his incendiary claim that it showed criminal wrongdoing and he was going to refer people to the Justice Department. And when you looked at the report, it said nothing of the sort. In fact, analysis basically confirmed the judgment of that intelligence community assessment, just as other Trump administration reviews had done. Well, same thing. This claim by Director Gabbard that what she is releasing, by the way, documents that were absolutely available to the people that did the Senate review and the House review and the Mueller review. So it's all been seen. It doesn't show what she says it shows. So let me walk it through really quickly. The intelligence community assessment basically came out and said we have evidence of Russia's intentions to shape, undermine the U.S. election. And those intentions took several forms. One was cyber activity to collect data, like hacking the DNC. Other activities were a few instances of getting voter records in states and localities. And the third was planting stories to try and shape the American people's view of who they should be voting for. So it was basically, for the first time in a really concerted, aggressive way, Russia's intention to influence the U.S. election. What the papers that Tulsi Gabbard released showed was a conversation around, was there interference? And intelligence analysis is arcane. Words matter a lot, how we define words. What she pulled out was the conversation within the intelligence community about the difference between how we defined interference and how we defined influence. Interference was direct action against the U.S. election infrastructure, so voting in all the 50 states, including assessments that would be really hard to do, in part because of how heterogeneous that actually is. So bottom line, what she's revealing is that the intelligence community assessed that there was no interference in the U.S. election infrastructure. Exactly the conclusion that you'll see in the ICA. So it doesn't show what she says. I don't know whether she's purposefully, or Director Ratcliffe was, trying to create a distraction or to create red meat for the base, or whether they just both don't understand the craft and discipline of intelligence. So when they look at it, they can't parse through it. I will say I went through every one of the pages. It all made sense to me, but I did it for 40 years. So, but for the people listening, there really isn't anything here. It's all been seen. The conclusions are the same. The report said what it did. So I think this will just go away. If you want to read it yourself, read the ICA, you'll come to the same conclusion that I have.
Yeah, I think the release time and date is probably the most significant thing here. Like on Friday afternoon, trying to take away some noise from all the Epstein article and conversation. Here's a new thing that maybe the base can bite off on, but the headline and the title does not correspond with the meat and potatoes.
Again, to say how damaging this is, and kind of either way it goes, right? If you have the heads of your intelligence community basically demeaning the intelligence community, because in order for it to have happened, a very fierce, very authority-resistant workforce would have had to go along with it. That hasn't been my experience. So now you have the leadership saying that your organization is bad. Do you think anyone in those organizations is going to be willing to come up and stand up and counter the direction you get? So that's one. But let's also say that they just aren't really aware of what the craft and discipline of analysis can do. Well, now you're not going to have that analysis in a really fraught world, which, again, the need for intelligence is not passé. To know the truth, see beyond the horizon, and allow leaders to act before events dictate is as vital today as it could. And that's really what the leadership is charged with producing. I don't know how you produce that if either you're undermining your own workforce and or you don't understand the discipline and why words matter and how analysis is put together. I don't think this is a great picture for our national security community, regardless of what the motivation for the releases were.
Well, let's move on to the CIA and the coming of age of AI spies. So there's a Washington Post opinion article about how the CIA was once reliant on disguise and secret communication, but now many of those techniques are left in the spy museum, and spies operate in a world where every action leaves a digital footprint, and concealment itself can raise suspicions. So there are a number of former CIA officers, your old stomping grounds too, that are founding startups that use AI, cultural data, behavioral analytics to help detect adversaries, protect secrets, and redefine spycraft. And even as persistent AI data and tools outpace human tradecraft, they're going to be slow on the uptake. The CIA also warns that adversaries will use this type of technology to undermine truth. And it's hard to get a big organization, even like the CIA, to make a paradigm shift. I expected this kind of conversation to come about a company that was still using a fax machine. Not the CIA. I mean, the first Bourne movie came out in 2002. So I feel like y'all have been using this stuff for a long time, or at least that was the perception of the CIA being on the cutting edge of technology and should have been well ahead of a lot of the commercial ecosystem here. How are they just now talking about how they're going to incorporate AI and how they're going to talk about incorporating the digital environment in their trade?
I've always said that how can you tell CIA officers watching a Jason Bourne movie? They're the ones laughing. But so don't be dismayed. The whole history of the intelligence community is really tied up in using technology and technological advances to solve big problems. So whether that was the U-2 when we needed to go higher than Soviet air defense missiles could shoot down planes so we could see what was going wrong. Huge history of the national security and particularly the intelligence community being drivers of technological advance. Nothing really new there. The difference is for most of the time, the CIA articulates a need and then some organization wins a contract to build specifically that. What really happened around the rise of Silicon Valley is the intelligence community recognized, and so did the national defense community, recognized that there was a lot going on out there that we wanted to have access to, and there wasn't easy access to it. So one day you and I will talk about Incutel. We asked a group of private citizens in 1999 to form essentially a venture firm to take our toughest problems and put money behind it to inspire the Silicon Valley innovators to take on our problems. And when they did, the revolution was they would form commercial companies and the agency would buy it back. And there are a lot of great results. Google Earth, Cloudera, Palantir, a lot of companies that benefited from that early investment. And so again, even that piece isn't new. Yay that they're doing this because now in 2025, information is the name of the game. And so they better be dominant in the information technologies, whether that is AI, for understanding the operational environment, for planning operations, for counterintelligence, for analysis. They are a real demander of capabilities, oftentimes beyond what the commercial companies are doing themselves. So it's good that they are involved. I think what you see reflected in this article, though, is still a problem we haven't solved, which is you wanted to use it, right? The companies, oftentimes formed or former officers, are producing some really great stuff. And let me be clear about what's awesome about being able to use a commercial capability different from something bespoke you built for yourself. If you build it for yourself, it's obsolete the day you bring it in the house. And actually, usually it's 5 years obsolete because that's how long it took you to build it. What's lovely about the commercial ecosystem is it just has its own refresh rate and update rate. So if you can figure out how to use commercial capabilities, you have a chance to update them. So yay. But what you're still seeing is the companies themselves saying they're having a hard time to get the attention and get the acquisition system to respond such that those capabilities can come to use. And so it goes back to how do we focus as much on the outcome, articulating the outcome, and on how you get it into an established system as much as we are investing in making sure that new things are being built. So, on the one hand, I was excited about this article, excited about some of the companies. And Truth in Advertising, one of them, I'm lucky enough to work with Strider, and what they're doing in terms of using information for counterintelligence is really eye-watering, but we got to get it into the organization. So I think that's the challenge that remains.
Determine the outcome is critical. Sometimes you're limited in them being able to tell you what they're trying to do, right? Because there are covert and there are state secrets and there are things that we don't want to either tip our hand at or disclose. But some of those companies you mentioned, shout out Strider, they're doing all this stuff with unclassified systems and collecting on open source data. And so that kind of leads me into a question. A lot of times, folks, we're a little concerned the government might be spying on our own citizens or looking in on ourselves. How much should we be worried about that? And should we trust AI to guide these intelligence decisions when they do incorporate those?
Eric, you've got like 4 questions in that question, so let me parse. Number 1 is there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. When I started in the CIA, we were hunting for information, right, that was hidden in places that we couldn't get to. And we developed a bunch of capabilities to be able to find that information that's being denied. In 2025, the world knows everything. All that data are around. And so I think what you're seeing is kind of a shift within the organization itself as how are we effective gatherers so we can provide the same answers. And so this question of the use of technology and how the community is going to use openly available data is all intertwined. Your second question, should be worried about it? Yes. The way data are available and being used, because There aren't a lot of secrets anymore in terms of how you can think about using data. And there are so many data offerers out there that in a bizarre way, for people who worry about privacy and worry about the information, I would say this is the time that you should trust the government more, because we're the only ones that have basically laws that govern how we can use that information. You won't share your data with the government, but you'll give everything you have to a vendor so you can buy a pair of shoes. Just think the reality of the data that are available, and not just available social media and news stories. I'm talking about data about transactions and about companies. Everyone is producing data. That data exists and people are thinking about, oh, I can sell that data for use. And so, yes, I think it is everyone's problem that as technology becomes adept at being able to mine that data and put answers together with that data, producers of data should be concerned about what they're making available, and individuals should be wary of the conclusions that are being drawn with it. And so when you say, should we be worried? Yes, we should be worried about all that data being used by adversaries and competitors who would advance their interests at ours. I think we also have to be worried about how we make sure we aren't duped. How do you identify that which is false information? Kind of classic counterintelligence thing. I think the real challenge that the intelligence community is going to have is it deals with fundamentally uncertain information to begin with. Right? We're worried about AI. Will it draw the right conclusions from a known data set? Does it hallucinate? Does it make things that are there? What if that known data set is incomplete or knowingly incomplete? That act of being able to allow people to deal with information certainly when it is uncertain information is actually the crux of the conversation that we just had about the arcanity of intelligence. So you want to play a game for a second so we can help our audience understand what it's like to be an intelligence officer?
Yeah, let's do it.
So here's the test. Everyone can play along. No one's watching you, so you can do it. Raise your hand if you like doing jigsaw puzzles. Raise your hand if you like doing jigsaw puzzles when you don't know the picture. Eric, you're out already?
I'm already out.
But we're still playing for the audience because some people would love that challenge. Raise your hand if you like doing jigsaw puzzles, you don't know the picture, and you know you only have a quarter of the pieces. Wow, some of you still have your hand up. All right, here's the last one. This is the test, and then I'm going to make you submit an application to an intelligence agency. Raise your hand if you like doing jigsaw puzzles, no picture, you only have a quarter of the pieces, and the president wants to know what the picture is in 5 minutes because he's going to make a consequential decision. So that is the craft of intelligence. And now imagine you're an analyst evaluating artificial intelligence to insert itself somewhere in that chain. How do you trust it? So I think one of the real advances, if they take it on board, would be, how to use artificial intelligence to either help reduce uncertainty or identify where the uncertainty is. I think that could be a huge gain.
In regards to our data, Zuck, the Meta guys, all the tech guys, they are collecting way more on us than our government is. Our government is well below China and Russia and other actors than our government, because there's monetization there, right? There's being able to predict what you're going to buy.
Or controlling your populace. We haven't talked about this, but China, with its national security laws that allow it to collect data from any Chinese citizen or entity anywhere, with now their supercompute capabilities, that national security law, the amount of data that they not only have access to, but they have illegally acquired, and then putting the tools against, they're getting really practiced. I guess the last thing I want to say, though, about this article, I think I could have read that article in 1998 when we started In-Q-Tel. Same set of things, a bunch of people out there doing a lot of interesting things, same lamenting that why aren't they put in place. So I think for every organization, and I think this is why I get so mad when we're wasting time looking backwards to find things that you might find, but it won't turn out to change the course of history, is we really need to imagine what our end state is. At some point, you're going to ban me from using the word outcome, but until you must do something different, technology will just be a piece part of what you already are. So here's my challenge for my CIA is, how are you going to operate in a world where you must be who you are? And that will help you have this urgency that tends to impel the adoption and use of the new technologies. It helps you shape what commercial vendors are doing, because the problem of being a commercial vendor is you're kind of guessing at what the requirement was and putting something up there for them to say, no, not quite. So I think we got to have more conversation about kind of what the end state you're seeing here. It's fertile. It's a fertile ground.
If the AI does become trustworthy enough and it is competent enough, do you think human agents will ever become obsolete?
I don't think so, but I think it will be different. It's one of the things that most impressed me over my colleagues who were in the business of human collection and human operations is what they understood about the environment in which they were collecting. They were such students of the culture and the locale. And so that presence and then actually dealing with humans to get a feel and an understanding of intent while not inviolate was still beneficial. So I think you're going to need to have physical presence. I think it gives you context that allows you to avoid mistakes, some of which we've made in the past. So I don't think so. But I do think that holding on to the structure of it or how sacrosanct it is, I think with enough data, I can infer intent of some. And so I think it's going to likely be a combination. Physical presence gives you a different perspective that sometimes can keep you from an error and other times can make you recognize something that you must otherwise not. So I don't think it goes away, but I do think you can't hold it up as the only thing that you do because it's unlikely to be enough. And more than that, your human operators aren't going to be able to operate without the technology to see what's happening to them in a digital environment.
I shall move on to this next story about drone wars and inadequacy. So the New York Times had a report revealing how U.S. drone and loitering munition production is lagging behind our adversaries. They went on location during a recent military exercise in Alaska where U.S. troops tested American-made drones, and it went about how you'd expect. Many performed poorly or failed entirely, were jammed, flying into mountains, etc. These are smaller FPV or first pilot vehicle individually flown drones, not your big Predators and MQ-25s, the Navy's new unmanned air refueling platform. But it highlighted many of the U.S. military's critical gaps in fielding these drones and an urgent need for a nimble, responsive defense industrial base. A lot of this comes on the heels of an executive order in June unleashing American drone dominance, which was mostly domestically focused, airspace integration, but also how we're going to increase production domestically, strengthening our supply chain. DJI of Shenzhen, China, they account for about 70% of all commercial drones, from hobby use to industrial, aerial photography, package delivery, weather research. DJIs are sold in the US, but they're prohibited for military use, and they're relatively affordable. Jeff Bezos will send you one today for $300. In the U.S., we've only got about 500 U.S. drone makers, and they can produce about 100,000 units a year, which isn't enough, according to the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International, a nonprofit organization for industry professionals who Sue spoke to earlier this year. Last week, the SECDEF doubled down with a memo unleashing the combined potential of American manufacturing, trying to delegate authorities to procure and operate drones from the bureaucracy to our warfighters, with the goal being in 2026, every squad is going to be equipped with low-cost, expendable drones. So I think the U.S. is good at the previously mentioned Reapers, the Predators, the big ones that we've seen before, but we're not good with small or swarms. I think the biggest change here is how the acquisitions process is going to make it easier for commanders to buy those drones, and it's going to intensify competition. My concern and question for you, Sue, is how do we avoid a piecemeal solution if all these individual commanders are buying their own drone that fits their area of operations or their specific mission set and are left with a number of drones that don't integrate and talk together?
Well, I think your question is right. That was supposed to be clever, left, right. So yay us, focusing on drones. Yay American innovation environment that has a lot of companies that are entrants into it. Yay the executive order. And by the way, I was on the Defense Innovation Board for former Secretary Austin, and we did a study that touches on a lot of your issues, Eric, about how we're going to meet the moment where drone warfare is both obviously valuable and, interestingly, obviously challenging us because of the asymmetry between the weapons we're trying to use to counter them and their capabilities. For anyone who's interested, it's a really good study. Go to the Defense Innovation Board and you can find all the studies. This idea that now we're doing a lot of things with acquisition where almost anyone can go out and let a contract to have some drones for their unit. But how do you do integrated warfare? How is that economy of scale? How do you make sure they can communicate with each other when your units get put together differently? How does that work when we're fighting with coalition forces? Most importantly, I think we have an impedance mismatch between our interests and our funding. So if I put myself in the shoes of someone who has an offering of a cool drone set and I want to buy it, I need to know that there's a payoff at the end of me ramping up a production line. And so not only are we interested in things, but we have not necessarily articulated how it's going to be used, nor have we chosen winners such that we can guarantee that there's an investment at the end so that these companies can ramp up production lines. Now that we've moved to so many that are not the big primes, but are small offers, they can't produce thousands on the investment dollars they have. We've got to figure out how they're going to work together. Does everyone get to buy whatever they want, or actually are the services going to stop being independent and come together so that they can come up with a standard so we can be much more clear about what it is we want to buy? And then can we make a commitment to buy certain things so that our private sector can stand up the production lines to meet the demands we have? And those seem trivial, but they are actually big because they require the institution, the organizations, and the humans to behave differently than they've been behaving. We're enthralled with what commercial can offer, but we're still reticent to engage them early on in terms of what we really need and what we're going to get. It's not that we don't recognize their value. We haven't had the conversation that actually allows us to choose winners from losers and to be able to invest properly so that the commercial companies know there's something on the other end. So I think it's the trend. It's the way wars are being fought now. But it isn't just straight acquisition policy or streamlining the ability to buy one thing. It's much bigger on the government end to figure out how we support that industry so they can deliver against our needs.
It still needs to be planned, right?
Yeah,
Because they're iterative. You see in the innovation cycle in Ukraine that they launch something and then Russia develops a defense and then they iterate and then they make a new one. And so another concern I have is just this reaction of we need to get these produced. We need to get the combatant commands to choose what they want. And then you don't have the sustainment or you don't have the follow on. It's kind of harkens back to, I imagine these guys hiking up the mountain in Alaska, these soldiers from the electromagnetic warfare platoon, the Army's 11th Airborne. And one of the anecdotes from the article was they had this Ghostbusters styled gun that they hiked all the way up there. And the reporter asks, "Oh, hey, are you going to use that or what's that for?" And they're like, "Well, we never bothered to use it because that thing never worked," right? At some point, an acquisition cycle bought this EW capability, but over time that was lost, either the ability to use it, the training, the parts, whatever, but there's still part of their tactics, techniques, and procedures is to carry this thing around and try to use it. So are we just too far behind? Are we able to catch up here?
So I love it when you give me an opening to show how old I am. So there's a thing called Revolutionary Military Affairs, right? That is describing exactly this moment when how you did things in the past gives way to how you can do things in the future. Some examples in Revolutionary Military Affairs are longbows and machine guns and ICBMs and the Blitzkrieg and carrier warfare, all of which in entirely different eras changed the ways war were fought. And so I think we're in the middle of one. Now, here's the problem. Being dominant in warfare before the revolution, it's not a good place to be. Being dominant actually hurts you when this revolution occurs. And so it seems that this was a revolution that was inspired outside of people with the big installed base and how he did it. And now we're caught reacting to this. And that is super hard and different challenges than buying more. There's a complacency that comes with having been dominant, and you tend to have to change your command structure. There is something that you have to look at to make sure that all the things that you used to need, do you need them anymore? We're at a time where we haven't really challenged whether all our services are still doing that. Take it back to my intelligence community, and this is on me when I was in there. We have 18 agencies and organizations. In 2025, do we need them all since most of them were started before? Hard to get rid of them. So what's hard is it's hard to be the dominant force to respond to a change, and you can't do it unless you're willing to put pressure back on your own organizations to see that what you have is insufficient. till we, within the department, figure out what we need to be in order to fight these wars, we are going to be struggling trying to maintain how we used to, and that's going to impede our ability to really uptake this new thing. Again, if you all are interested in it, there's a really good RAND study that came out on revolutionary military affairs. But I think you're just onto something, that the technologies are there. We kind of know this is the way it's going, but man, I wish it were as easy as buying enough things, even though that would help us on one level. We still got to doctrinally, to your point, and policy-wise, kind of embrace it.
Does reading this article or having this conversation remind you of a time during your career when we were lagging behind on something like this and able to catch up or leap ahead?
So we do it all the time, right? If you go back to the beginning of the atomic revolution, we were having our hats handed to us by the Soviets, who were able to run around our free and open society and collect all the information they wanted. They were stealing us blind in terms of our nuclear program. And so we figured out we needed to get our access, but we couldn't have our humans access in the same way. So we figured out how to throw collectors up in space and be able to do remarkable things from space. When we recognize what we must do and commit to it, we are really good. All those attributes of competitive innovation and lots of different sources become a real strength for us. But when we're expecting the piece parts to kind of burble up and become the mission we need, absolutely we can do it. Oh, the intelligence community's response to the war on terror. We had built whole generations of collection theory and collectors against going after the information that governments held. And suddenly, during the war on terror, it wasn't governments that had the information. And so we responded to it. We didn't respond as quickly as we needed to because we still had 9/11. But in the 25 years since then, we haven't had that kind of attack. So lots of good things. My visual for today, because I seem to be on a visual kick right now. And I don't know if the listeners know this, I'm a zoologist by education. I know you're thinking, what? But what I would say what we're doing right now with technology is like if we had a petri dish and I put a bunch of carbons and oxygens and nitrogen molecules in there and add in a few amino acids and some other proteins, and then we just stared at the petri dish as though life was going to issue forth, we would wait a long time. That feels like what we're trying to do with technology. It's like going to the moon. When Kennedy said by the end of the decade, we're going to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, they had no idea how they were going to do it. But darned if they didn't do it. And so many things have fallen from it, including Tang and Velcro. It seems our strategy now is if we build Tang and Velcro, we'll get to the moon. We just got to identify the quest and then organize against it and quit using regulation as the reason why we're not able to get there. Every regulation and policy is something that we put in place at a different time. Let's go ahead and make them meet our moment. It's a good day so far, right? We're talking basketball, zoology, fun days.
I think it's good that we're having these conversations about it, right? And the executive order, the SECDEF's memo, the conferences, the exercises, these are all things that need to happen. And we're behind, sure, in some areas, but it's an opportunity, right, to leap ahead and integrate some of those semi-autonomous platforms maybe.
Yep. And on both this topic and the previous one with the CIA, you're hearing us put a lot of pressure on the government as being responsible for being more articulated about the need and more open to different ways of appreciating it. If I were talking to the CEOs of those companies, when you go in and talk to someone, don't just talk about what your thing will do, talk about what it'll let you achieve. And don't just throw the technology over the transom, making all the work of integration fall on the government side. So, if you're in the private sector, you don't have to be like a guppy waiting to be fed. There are things you can do to be able to close that mission gap. Even if your government partners don't start with talking about it, you can help drive them through that by you saying the uses that you see and what will enable.
Next, we're going to move on to rare earths, real risk, and what the U.S. is still missing. So the U.S. is trying to reboot rare earth production in Texas. Actually, it's mined in California, but refined in Texas. But environmental reviews, Chinese dominance, and low market prices still make it tough to compete. So China has over 90% of the world's rare earth magnets. Couple reasons for this is some of the world's best mines. It also has cheap chemicals for processing the materials, a large technically trained workforce. They don't give a shit about the environment and handling toxic rare earth mining waste. They're just going to dump it and move on. And they also undercut prices by their ability to not have a line between state and industry, so the government can just set how it wants and adjust the markets. But this article was about MP Materials. So they've got the largest mine in the Western Hemisphere out in California, and then they bring the material to Texas for processing in the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area. They've recently put $1 billion capital investment into equipment because they've got a $500 million contract coming from Apple. They're expected to work with General Motors, and they've got a DoD investment coming that should increase their production from 1,000 to 10,000 metric tons, driving a need for a new factory, which they're aptly naming 10X. Some critics of this plan say it's the government picking winners and losers, and an executive at one rare earth business said they seem to have made a big bet on one company. So, Sue, should we be concerned about only one company here, this much attention from the federal government?
What I love this topic, too, because it's a good stalking horse for a lot of supply chain issues that have certainly smacked us in the head over the past year. I'm of mixed minds about the one thing. Sometimes I'm not in the government anymore. Sometimes the government's dither comes from exactly not wanting to choose a winner or a loser. We have regulations that talk about competitive selections, and you don't want to be beholden. You don't want the government to be basically holding the future of the company in its hands and being responsible for that. And so oftentimes we spread the money around too much rather than going ahead and saying, we need this production will help us, and go on. Sometimes I think it's okay to pick a winner. I'd probably do some kind of budgetary jujitsu with the Congress if I were going to go that way and pick a winner. I would, as part of my budget submission, say these 5 areas are so important to us. We're going to pick winners in them. And we need you to support us in that because it's so important that we make an advance. And then once we've gotten so that we have a supply and we understand how we're going to go, then we'll open up the competition to anyone else who can perform. So I do kind of lean a bit. If you know what you need, go ahead and get it. On the other hand, I have also, from my career, had the saying that when it comes to suppliers of critical national capabilities, one is none. If something goes wrong, if there's a problem with the technology or the problem with their ability to deliver, what are you going to do? Because you've now made yourself beholden on that one thing. And so it's not a good long-term strategy, even if sometimes you have to get going. A great example is low Earth orbit communication. So looking at Ukraine and the incredible contribution that Starlink made with its low Earth orbiting capability, and they continue to expand their offerings, whether for citizens in rural environments or for the military and first responders. They are preeminent in this area. But even during the Ukraine crisis, we heard Elon Musk say, well, I may turn it off. I may not want you to use it. So one of the problems with getting excited about a capability that is outside the control of the government is this idea of you can decide that, but I can't, right? The government can't decide not to be involved in some of these things. And so to have invested in but not be able to rely on the capability, I think is really one of the biggest things that government acquirers struggle with is, man, I want that capability, but I can't afford to commit to it and then have it be unreliable. And one of the reasons why bespoke solutions are so expensive is that you're paying for reliability and availability. So this tussle between many and one is real, but to have no supply chain and to put off us investing in what we now understand clearer than ever is minerals that are important for the futures we envision probably would make me lean, if I had confidence in one supplier, to get going with them, and then I'd figure out how to add more as I went around.
Yeah, you got to establish that traction, right? Show that we are capable of doing this. And it's at a minimum 50% more expensive to do it in this country than it is to do in China. Throughout the past 30 years, from the 90s and 2000s, there's been highs and lows of companies starting to refine rare earth minerals domestically, and then they go out of business. And this article has an interesting story about these guys in MP Materials in Texas, how they got involved in it. It was almost by chance. But I don't think we'd have this capability without the government and their investment.
So there's a striking similarity between what we're talking about with rare earth and the need for strategic investment because it is a strategic national need, because it is super expensive, and what happened with chips. You can almost do a one-for-one historical review of where we are with chips. And the fact that we offshored manufacturing of the chips, we were the leaders. We decided it was expensive to manufacture them here because of environmental considerations. And so we shipped them overseas where it was less expensive to produce and faster to delivery. And then we find that we are kind of in a world of hurt in terms of our reliance in a very geopolitically fraught environment. Too much faith in market forces rather than national security investment, and it's almost one for one. And so now, if you want the cautionary tale, look what we're trying to recover on that front. And that is massively easier to do than to recover quickly from a mining perspective. So I think we've seen this story before of when we offshore something. We were leaders in rare earths several decades ago, and we actually paid China to do things to basically process the ones that we had. So take this cautionary tale, put it in the calculus, see how long it's taking us to recover, and recognize that chips are easier, and you're going to see the kinds of things we need to do. So there are movers on this in Congress and others in recognition. This is an area where I don't believe, unless the government basically underwrites the production of this, that I don't see how a commercial venture has enough market traction to be able to produce what we need as a nation, regardless of who are the people that are going to take those products and turn them into things we use. So I think we have a roadmap. What is your least favorite saying of mine? What's the best time to plant a tree, 20 years ago or today? I think rare earth, this is a today issue in terms of setting aside the investment and getting this going, because we know we need it and we know what happens if we don't.
It seems like the perfect example of a government intervention in a need for a subsidy, right? It's like how we subsidize corn and corn farming in this country, because if there was a worldwide conflict, we're going to need to feed our people and we're going to need food.
100%.
I also had an interesting conversation with my 5-year-old about this. So naturally, trying to learn the 17 rare earth elements, I made a song that I'll attach at the end of this episode. But he asked me about why China was ahead of us in rare earth production. And I said, they don't care about the environment. And he said, why? Why don't they care about the environment? I thought, we've talked before about how they're so fixed on their long time horizon, right? They're centuries old governments and dynasties, and how they're looking at the world through a different time horizon than us. If they do that, wouldn't you think they would care more about the environment because they expect to be here for longer and they expect to have that longer time horizon?
I think in a way they suffer from the same thing, same gift of geography we have, where we have so much abundance here. We're so big, so protected. They're so big that I think there are people that think that things that are big can be squandered. I think we're getting our comeuppance on that, but maybe because closed societies have fewer pressures put on them, that they don't have to respond to that in the same way we do. Although I would say that we're not always responding to the pressures as we might either. I can't wait to hear the song.
It's very catchy. It talks about laser beams, so it's called a laser beam song in our house. And disclaimer for parents out there, be careful if you let your kids listen to it, because it is very catchy and annoying. All right, moving on to our last headline. The clock is ticking on state cybersecurity funds. Should we renew the lifeline? The State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program, SLCGP, which was created in 2022 with a $1.35 billion to help smaller U.S. governments strengthen their cyber defenses. Think state, local, tribal, and territory officials. The executive director of the National Association for State CIOs, Chief Information Officers, said that it appears the legislation is not going to get clawed back this year, which is the good news, but uptake has been slow. And so because less than half of the allocated funding has been drawn, it doesn't look like it's going to get reauthorized for FY 2026. The state, local, tribal, and territory officials cite confusing requirements, limited capacity, lack of technical support. We've talked about it before. Cyber readiness is part of our infrastructure. And if we view the internet as a utility, what are these local and state governments doing, not getting this implemented as fast as they can? And why is there still money on the table?
I don't know, Eric. I think this is just another example of the kinds of things we're going to have to solve as we de-emphasize federal and expect state and local to pick it up. So now we know the problem isn't just transfer of funds, it's actually inspiring the localities to make it a priority for use. For as much as you and I talk about the big risks of cyber intrusions and cyber attacks, not just in terms of cost, but in terms of privacy and quality of life. And I think we're almost inured to see so many stories, and for most people, it does affect their lives. So I think you can decide that's not where you're going to get on right away. So one, just priority, urgency. Listen, I'm also going to tell you, it's a workforce thing. Do you have the talent to implement it? And over how many places, and who has the responsibility to implement it? And even if you have the resources, to whom do you distribute them? And how do they implement it? How are you sure that it's going to achieve the effect that it wants? Even though we haven't done things brilliantly centrally, I think this move from centralized funding and services to localized funding is much more than just transfer of funds. It's a lot about wherewithal. It's a lot about other demands. And so we talked last time about Kerrville, and you mentioned, are there cooperatives that can come together? Are there alliances that can share resources and lessons learned across many localities? It is a much more complex issue than just moving the money from one place to another. And it's a much more complex issue than just, I have money, how am I going to spend it? So Mayor Tommy Battle in Huntsville, Alabama, has been on geospatial intelligence and cyber for a long time. I would expect, if I looked at his locality, if there were money available to him, I would expect him to be using it. If I were in another place that had a cyber attack, a cyber resilience institute, I'd go and see who the people were that were doing a good job at spending the funds. And you could probably find out who'd spent their funds well, and then they're the people that know, could perhaps give you a model. So there's that kind of thing, consortium that we can put together. I do love, for all my service at the federal level, I do think the way we rebuild and modernize and revolutionize American capability is at the local level, because that's where we have trust and that's where we have shared interest. But we haven't done that on these sorts of things in so long. I think we've got to build up some muscles to be able to do it. And it's a shame that this program will go away, because at least it provided resources if the locality decided to use it.
One of the other concerns is whenever you're talking about taking money back, is the use it or lose it, right? You got to spend your budget by the end of the year. Otherwise, you're not going to get it next year. So I don't want to say that it's shocking that they haven't spent it yet. I mean, hopefully they're using it in a judicious way and being good stewards of the government's money. But at the same time, our cybersecurity is only as good as our weakest link, right? And so if you've got a vulnerability at the state and local level, or you've got a vulnerability through the city hall Wi-Fi, that affects all of us.
You're either target or transportation. You're either going to be the pathway to something more interesting, or you're the interesting thing. The good news is there are tons of resources that are available for this. CISA, over the last, how many years? For 8 years, has done a great job making resources available. There are lots of consortia focused on this. So if someone out there is in a state government or in a local government or an alliance of power companies, I would encourage you to really leap into this fray. There will people that will help, and at least for the short haul, there are monies that are available for you to spend.
Now we'll look at some of our predictions from last week and see how we held up. My primary prediction was it was going to be crypto week, and we're going to see at least one piece of legislation passed. The Genius Act has been signed into law, and we'll talk about stable coins and Bitcoin probably next week or in the coming weeks.
Yeah, we'll have crypto episode soon. That'll be good.
But my prediction was that Bitcoin would rise, and it was high on Monday of last week when we recorded, 120,000 per Bitcoin. But today, about this time of this recording, it's down to 118,000. So I do not think I get a point there, because Bitcoin did not go up. So I think we'll see some traction in the coming weeks, though, as some of these stablecoin stuff starts to get implemented and people start to get their head wrapped around it a little bit more.
Yep. Well, my predictions, I think I did worse than you. The question was, would Epstein be like so many previous issues, like the budget or like the attack on Iran, where it was super spinny for a week, but then it just kind of drifted off into oblivion? I think I gave it a 50-50. I thought it might be an opening to see, because the Republican base was so up in arms over, wait, I thought you were going to get rid of corruption, and now you're saying there's no corruption, but it might go away too, is just yet another thing. WNBA All-Star Game, I said Team Clark would win. They did not. So I'm 0 for 2. And as much as I love basketball, boy, that WNBA All-Star Game was really difficult to watch because it was a bunch of people being enamored with a 4-point line, demonstrating to all that it's hard to shoot from there. But I still watched it. Anyway, so that was, I think you're 1-1 and I'm 0 for 2 this week.
Watch it for next week. Any big predictions?
I guess I'll stay with my intelligence thing. I think the story on Comey Brennan and Clapper being arrested, I think that'll just go away. There's nothing there. So for people really excited about that and think that finally where are we going to have some arrests, there won't be any arrests because there's nothing there. So that's my prediction.
I might check. Pull what I got.
Eric, I think it's a super frothy time. And by that, I mean there's lots of talk and lots of hyperbole and relatively less substantive action going on that we can push off of. So I'm going to honor your check, and I'm going to just say it's as hard to make a prediction as it is to generate outcome, but we're going to keep at it.
All right. Well, that's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us. And no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
So thanks for joining us this week. Remember, we're here for you. Look for a link in the show notes to provide us feedback or suggest topics for next time. Like I said, Eric and I are coaches' dreams. I've been told by previous bosses who gave me feedback that it was a gift. It didn't always feel that way, but it always worked out that it was. So join us next week for the UI podcast, wherever you go to listen, and go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.
Your earbuds and your submarine, they're hiding in your MRI machine, in magnets, chips, and laser beams. Rare earths are quite essential stuff, though finding them is kinda tough. From green tech dreams to stealthy gear, P17s are what we cheer. Strontium, yttrium, lanthanum too. Cerium shines in a catalytic brew. Praseodymium and neodymium play in magnets, don't go away. Promethium glows, samarium strong, doesn't care. Europium lights up your TV screen. Gadolinium helps your MRI machine. Terbium, dysprosium, heavy and bright. Holmium shines with magnetic might. Erbium, thulium, lasers go zoom. With terbium's next, then lutetium, boom. They're not in earth like shiny gold. They're tucked in rock, a little bold. Mixed with dirt and not so pure. Extraction takes a costly tour. They're mined and ground and baked and burned with solvents that the chemists churned. Refined with care and lots of cash to end up in your camera flash. So next time when your gadgets glow or cars go vroom and turbines blow, remember what you've learned today. Rare earths are rare in every way, but don't go digging in your yard. They're hidden deep and mining's hard, so sing this song and feel quite wise. Rare earths are modern day prize.